Oh, unlimited rice pudding. It's time for some classic Who, and I am going to be taking a look at a 7th Doctor adventure, which I haven't done in a while, and the last one I did was Time and the Ronnie, so yeah. So I was due for a good one, and out of the options that I presented to my Patreon supporters, they have selected for me Remembrance of the Daleks. Which honestly might be shooting me in the foot for down the line, because this might be as good as the 7th Doctor gets. This is a phenomenal episode. I love this thing. And watching it again, like I haven't seen it for a few years now, and like I feel like I've gotten better at appreciating classic Who than I did in terms of, you know, for the time, because generally, like in the early days of my starting to visit classic Who, unless the writing was incredibly, you know, clever and the acting was really good, they could lose me because of the wonky effects and because of some of the other iffy stuff going on, which isn't really the fault of the show a lot of the time. I will still call out classic Who when I think design decisions were bad, but unless it's a total fail, I don't usually call out the execution of effects and things like that. But so now that I'm in a place where I better appreciate that end of it, I like this thing all the more. And actually I can kind of appreciate how big this story was, like scale-wise, because like the number of Daleks that are on screen at the same time, the fact that they're rolling down the streets of London, the explosions, like the number of legitimate explosions in this. You know, we have a landing shuttlecraft, we got a mothership, we got the Emperor Dalek. Like this is really impressive production design, especially for the time. They even got some CGI stuff in there that looks pretty decent, especially for the 80s on a TV budget. I mean, it's still shot in the very, you know, point and shoot, very basic way that TV was shot. So maybe that's part of why I didn't appreciate that at the time, because, you know, I'm young. So my idea of what is a big sort of epic scope thing is largely informed by more modern shooting sensibilities. But, you know, looking at it now, oh yeah, some impressive stuff. This was the first episode or first story for Sylvester McCoy's second season, so season 25 of classic Doctor Who. And you can tell that between the previous season and this one, they had really put a lot of thought into what they were going to do with the Doctor, because the first season he's not quite fully formed as a character and seems to be largely informed by whatever is very much not how the character was when Colin Baker played him. So, you know, he's much goofier, he's much friendlier, he's kind of clownish in a bit. But here we get what I think the 7th Doctor is remembered for, being sort of the game master, being, you know, the guy who's thinking several steps ahead, the guy who's got a bit of a vicious streak, and a calculated one, because the Doctor can't have a vicious streak, but if you were to compare it to, say, Tennant and the 10th Doctor, that was a case where the Doctor, when angry, could be vicious. In the moment, could be vicious. This is a Doctor who plans and has to plan for, like, there's some extended planning he does that pays off in some pretty aggressive moves that I think other Doctors, it wouldn't have made sense for them. You know, it would have been out of character for them. And some people can argue that it's out of character for the Doctor, but I do think it goes from regeneration to regeneration. So that sense of being calculating while still having a little bit of fun, a little bit of sense of humor, but that underlying nature of always being scheming, of really plotting out what it is that he's going to do, of not just flying by the seat of his pants, which normally is a trait I kind of like in the Doctor, but it's interesting seeing this other angle on him, and I think McCoy plays it phenomenally. Also, we've got Ace. Ace is the best. I mean, Ace is just awesome. And she gets away with traits that I can find irritating in other companions because of how young she is. So, like, someone as young as she is, sort of not always listening to the doctor or following, the things that he tells her to do, don't bother me here the way they bother me with companions who are, supposed to be in their 20s. That I'm a little bit more, oh, are you kidding me? Her, like, with her whole attitude and her youth, I'm like, no, I buy it. She didn't stay put when she was told to, and she went back for her stereo, of all things. And I mean, like, how awesome is Ace? Well, name me another companion who beats the ever-loving crap out of a Dalek with a bat. Oh, it's awesome. It's so good. And she's terrific, like, every step of the way. And I always love the rapport between them, that the doctor has this, wanting to sort of get her to think things through a little bit more, wanting her to learn, but also kind of being a little bit condescending to her, because he can be like that. And her wanting to learn, but also not wanting to be treated the way he sometimes treats her. And there's pretty good supporting work here as well. I think you kind of feel the absence of the Brigadier, because we've got, this other military guy that the doctor actually calls the Brigadier. So it's like we call attention to the fact that we could have had a better character here under ideal circumstances. But there's also the scientific head. She's quite good. She's interesting. I like how she stands up to the military guy, because of this. He's like, you weren't hired for this, and she's like, I wasn't hired at all, I was drafted. And I like that she bites back at him somewhat. And actually, she has a few interesting moments with her sort of assistant, her secretary, like, to the point that I'm like, are they flirting? And that could just be me projecting, but those two women, I'm like, I feel like there's a history here. But again, I'm unintentional, I'm sure, especially given the era that the thing was made. But, like, it's kind of nice when I can read that stuff in and not feel like I'm crowbarring and just looking at it going, yeah, I could see that. The Daleks, oh god, so many Daleks. And, they're great. We have they give credit to Series 1 for it, but here we get a Dalek floating, going upstairs. We've got it here. We've got the special weapons Dalek, which is really cool. I do, like, this is one of my nitpicky things. I do hate the voice on the Emperor Dalek. And I am going to be talking later plot stuff, so I'm going to be getting into spoilers soon. Like, it's awesome. If you haven't seen it, it's awesome. Go watch it. Okay? I'll more openly talk spoiler stuff. I know part of the reason the Emperor Dalek speaks the way he does is to cover up the fact that it's Davros, so it doesn't just sound like him. But it's still really, it's great. Like, even by Dalek voice standards, it's great. I think it's because it's such a shout. Whereas, in my mind, good Dalek dialogue, aside from exterminate, isn't actually shouted. It's said very harshly, but it's not actually shouted. Whereas the Emperor Dalek stuff is, and I'm like, oh god, stop. Like, another nitpicky thing, I guess, related to that is I do kind of question whether or not this story needed Davros. Like, I'm not sure his presence adds much other than to basically remind us that he's still alive and that he's still out there. Like, it could have just been an Emperor Dalek and the story doesn't change really. So, yeah, and again, I appreciate the face-off between, the Seventh Doctor and Davros. I'm not saying those aren't good scenes or good moments. I'm just not sure what having it actually be Davros adds. And one of the things that I am kind of annoyed about is that ever since Genesis of the Daleks, Classic Who, basically every Dalek story was also a Davros story. And that I don't think is necessary. And that kind of, like, just annoys me as a pattern. That said, I do like that this kind of picks up on the strands of, the fractioning of the Daleks that was sort of planted back in Revelation of the Daleks. And because that's always an idea that I love. And I especially think that they kind of explain it really well here, where it's sort of laid out, well, look, they're all about purity. So when you get additional mutations in a certain strain, they're going to consider each other to be too different. They're not going to get along. So, like, when you're that obsessed with being the perfect thing, you're going to start to eat your own when somebody is not what you say should be perfect. And that makes total sense. And I've always wanted the Dalek Civil War to be a thing that comes back and has more presence, because it hasn't had a lot, like, outside of Revelation and this, which I think is a shame, because I think there's a ton of stuff to be mined from that, especially since, Daleks threatening basically everything that isn't a Dalek has kind of been done to death at this point. So that's really cool to see here. We've got this, I guess he's a sergeant, who Ace kind of takes a shine to, and I like the way that is dealt with, because he is so charming. And he doesn't do that immediate heel turn that as soon as it's revealed that he has links to not great people, that he suddenly starts acting like a different character. He still so it's not like a Hans in Frozen kind of thing. He's still behaving like the same character. And so it does make you go, like, can he be redeemed? And then by the end, like, no, I guess not, because initially he's like, look, I didn't know I was working for the Daleks. I thought I was just working for this guy who was being controlled by the Daleks, and I didn't know that. And he makes that claim, but then he goes and sides with them even after he knows that they are working for the Daleks, and you're like, oh, dang. And how he's dealt with is done pretty well. The little girl is an interesting idea. I'm not sure they milked as much of that as could have been done. I wonder in some ways if she's like a precursor to, like, sort of the Dalek shells that we started seeing in Asylum of the Daleks. I don't know. And also, I recently, in my overdue Doctor Who run, I recently did my recording for School Reunion, and it's interesting that, like, that picks up here, this idea that the creativity of youth is important for sort of working around problems in a creative way. And the Daleks especially need that, because they're so fixed into a locked-in mindset that they all think the same way, that they can't come at problems more creatively, and which is something that's come up before as well. So that's a cool thing to sort of see. That's a cool thread to get pulled on again. I mean, just overall, this thing just fires on all cylinders, like little tiny nitpicks, but this thing really does cook. It moves well. The characters are great. They got great moments. The Doctor's awesome. Ace is awesome. The Daleks are cool. Like the overall plot and arc of it is neat. Sort of calling back in some ways to the first Doctor and having him, go for the hand of Omega, and like the little things like he gets a blind priest to help him bury this thing so that the priest doesn't know that the casket's floating on its own. But the priest also knows him and like knew the Doctor from before. It's like, your voice has changed. And there's like this one odd little scene that like is actually a pretty nice scene, which is one that goes on in a cafe, and it's sort of the Seventh Doctor's. It's a little bit the equivalent of the Fourth Doctor's "Do I Have the Right?" moment in Genesis of the Daleks. And the Seventh Doctor, it's funny because he presents the problem in a much more roundabout fashion, which is probably why he kind of doesn't come to the same conclusion that Tom Baker's Doctor did, because he presents it through this metaphor of what if there was no sugar? And, then, no one would have to be a cane cutter. And the guy who's serving him, who is black, and actually played by Jeffrey, the butler from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, that's just cool, says, well, if there was no sugar, I wouldn't even be here. Not that I wouldn't be alive, but I wouldn't be in this place, because my grandfather wouldn't have been, or my great-grandfather or whatever, wouldn't have been kidnapped to be put into slavery to work in the cane field. I'd be an African right now. And it's an interesting way of sort of coming at that conundrum that the Doctor has visited before, but sort of by coming at it at a different angle and having a different input, it makes sense that this Doctor kind of allows himself to do what the Fourth Doctor wouldn't or couldn't, and without feeling like a betrayal of the character, because he does pause and ruminate on it. He does sort of work the question over in his head. It's just until you get to the very end of the story, you might not realize exactly what it was he was doing there. So yeah, this is great. I love this story. I mean, it's my favorite Seventh Doctor story that I have seen. Because I have seen more than just the ones I've reviewed for this series so far. It'll be tough to topple. I hope to enjoy other Seventh Doctor stories. I would be surprised if if anything was better than this. This is just great. Remembrance of the Daleks! Have you seen it? Do you have remembrance of it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about a whole bunch of stuff you can do, because there's buttons and links, and there's a whole bunch of links and a P.O. box and all sorts of stuff. There's a link to my Patreon if you're feeling generous. If not, you don't have to look in the description or click on any of that stuff if you don't want to, because at the end of the day, folks, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.